Shock! The Kremlin is blowing up Moldova. Right now, Putin is launching a coup. Troops are massing with Transnistria. It's begun! Moscow has already broken in. This isn't just a buildup, it's a full-scale invasion. The Kremlin has CHISINAU by the throat. Zelenskyy has switched to revenge mode. Ballistic SAPSANs are already on the launch pad. The first strikes on the Kremlin, it seems, have begun. Russia is ablaze with terrorist attacks. Powerful explosions are rousing the regions. Security forces are scrambling. Moscow is on high alert. Secret documents have landed on the FSB chief's desk. A new Crocus. Britain has issued an ultimatum that chills the blood. The new weapon is capable of breaking the front in weeks. Putin is cornered, the Kremlin is in panic, and this is just the warm-up. All this and more in our upcoming report. Hotspot. Shock. The Kremlin is blowing up Moldova. Putin has launched a secret operation in Transnistria. The situation is heating up to the limit. Is Moscow really setting up a new military staging ground for an attack? Watch.
Moscow is stepping up its actions in the occupied region of Moldova to divert Ukraine's resources by increasing the threat from the Russian enclave. Military units and quasi-formations are calling up reservists, and weapons are being taken out of storage at the depots.
There has been talk of repeated detentions and hours-long searches of Transnistrian residents at the CHISINAU airport. The Transnistrian side has demanded that Moldova stop its pressure. Complaints about the actions of the Moldovan authorities are also being submitted to the public chamber of Transnistria. In
Transnistria, production of UAVs and a drone operator training center have been established. This was also stated by Alexandru Bugorean, the mayor of the city of Leova, in the month of September. According to
our information, Russia is trying to organize drone production on the territory of Transnistria. We have the specific names of two factories in Tiraspol. We're talking about Moldavizolit and Electromash.
The pro-Kremlin newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda called the information about drone production in Transnistria.
Normal good neighborly relations and the complete absence of any conflict, both with Ukraine and, importantly, with Moldova.
Moscow is sending intelligence agents to Transnistria who have been tasked with sowing chaos through information operations and carrying out provocations. The Russian Federation hopes to destabilize the situation in Moldova and on the border with the southern regions of Ukraine. Because of the actions of the Russians, the risk is that they will facilitate the infiltration of sabotage groups into the territory of our country is growing. If necessary, the Kremlin will be able to use the resources it has accumulated for escalation.
As for the relationship with the Russian Federation, they are much more transparent, more readily understandable to me personally, and significantly more stable.
The Kremlin has established a state there, with an isolated banking system, a non-convertible currency, and a massive level of corruption. In Transnistria, almost every other company belongs to the oligarch Gushan,
who controls a significant part of the PMR's economy. According to some reports, Sheriff provides more than 50% of the region's tax revenue, and tens of thousands of people work at the holding's enterprises. Back in 2015, Gushan was called one of the richest people in the post-Soviet space, and his fortune was estimated at $2.1 billion.
Ukraine froze Gushan's assets because his company supplied goods and services to Russia's military-industrial complex.
And according to the Moldovan Public Services Agency, as of 2024, Moldavizolit continued its deliveries to the neighboring country. The Ukrainian investigation claims that goods or services from the Moldavizolit enterprise ended up in structures of the Russian defense system that produced weapons used in the war against Ukraine. This creates a legal link between assets connected to the Sheriff holding.
This is yet another blow to Putin's war machine. Previously, another blow was the fact that after Gazprom stopped supplying gas at the beginning of 2025, gas in Transnistria is now coming from Moldova Gas.
The energy crisis in Transnistria, which triggered an economic crisis, is ongoing, and it threatens to turn into a real humanitarian catastrophe.
In addition to the resources with which Putin bribed his enclave, he also provided Transnistria with political and military support, maintaining his own military contingent there.
It is necessary to thoroughly examine what exactly the Russian operational group of forces represents and to propose appropriate solutions for dismantling this structure. But at the same time, there is also the so-called Transnistrian army on the left bank. At 12 Manoilova Street in Tiraspol, there is the so-called Ministry of State Security, which is something like an analog of the KGB or NKVD and keeps the residents of the left bank in fear. There are various kinds of special battalions.
The separatists are armed with grads, drones, and even helicopters and tanks. Russia can also mobilize civilian Transnistrians to whom Putin has handed out Russian passports.
The entire Russian military group stationed there, except perhaps for the highest-ranking officers, is made up of local residents. That's why they have such fertile ground there. The propaganda there is exactly the same as in Russia, starting right from kindergarten. That's how it is there. They march, they dress in military uniforms.
CHISINAU plans to join the European Union in the coming years. To do this, the Moldovan authorities are required to address the conflict in the Dniester region.
As for the actual resolution of the conflict in Moldova, we are committed to facilitating the negotiation process, which will involve both the Transnistrian side and our supporting international partners, primarily the European Union, the United States, and the OSCE.
In order to keep its protégé in power, Russia launched a hybrid operation related to the so-called presidential elections in the PMR. In 2026,
Russia has acted and continues to act as a guarantor of the Transnistrian settlement.
Putin's main goal in Transnistria remains to make Tiraspol dependent again, improve the image of the local pro-Russian leaders, and quietly increase the number of military personnel in the region. Thus, instead of dealing with his own economic and political problems, Putin is focused on militarizing the territories he has occupied.
The apocalypse for Russia has begun. Zelenskyy officially gives the green light to the SAPSAN combat ballistic missiles. And the inferno is already rising above the horizon. This is only the prologue. The Ukrainian armed forces are calculating strikes before the Kremlin recovers. Explosive details coming next.
SAPSAN in action. The Ukrainian armed forces have started using domestically produced ballistic missiles to strike the enemy. The exact specifications of the SAPSAN missile are not being disclosed, but its deployment by Ukrainian forces will allow them to hit enemy targets, possibly even more effectively than with ATAK-MS. Ukrainian missiles have twice the explosive power, fly faster, and have a greater range.
What is the exceptional advantage of using the SAPSAN operational tactical complex? It is that its use against targets both on the territory of the Russian Federation, primarily on the territory of the Russian Federation, and against legitimate military targets in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine is an exclusive sovereign right of the Ukrainian side itself.
In addition to SAPSAN, the Ukrainian army is using several other domestically produced missiles against the aggressor country. This was stated by the President of Ukraine.
This shows that the Ukrainian side, despite the intensity of strikes on the defense industry enterprises, has managed not only to preserve the defense industry infrastructure, but also to increase and scale up the production of its own strike weapons. This testifies to the presence of qualified engineering personnel and B, sufficient funding for Ukrainian defense industry enterprises, which are capable of scaling up the production of Ukrainian-made strike weapons. Virtually all Ukrainian strike weapons are made exclusively from Ukrainian components.
Let us recall that in September of this year, Volodymyr Zelenskyy stated that Ukraine is actively developing long-range weaponry. He said that the tests were successful and the next stage is the launch of serial production. Earlier, Ukraine began production of Flamingo cruise missiles with a range of up to 3,000 kilometers. On Friday, December 5th, the company Firepoint delivered another batch of cruise missiles to the Ukrainian military. Also in November, the armed forces of Ukraine attacked important targets on Russian territory. Long Neptune missiles were used for the strikes. Another of the most important developments has been drone missiles such as Polyanitsia, Piklo, Ruta, and Bars.
The Ukrainian side is ready for scaling up and using their own strike assets across the territory of the Russian Federation. They were talking about the SAPSAN and accordingly the Flamingo. In addition, Ukraine's defense forces have scaled up the production of strike drones with a target range of over 1,500 kilometers.
Ukrainian armed forces are successfully striking military targets in the Russian Federation, and oil refineries are also in the crosshairs of drone systems.
It was precisely the strategic use of Ukrainian strike assets that effectively and in a significant way allowed to block the operations of about 40% of Russian oil refineries. According to the Russian side itself, the losses to the Russian budget are estimated at around $100 billion. But it should also be noted that the Ukrainian side does not intend to stop at these achievements.
Since the start of the full-scale war, Ukraine has ramped up weapons production and the implementation of new technologies, which are already being used at the front. The volume of domestic weapons production has increased dozens of times. Thanks to private companies, Ukraine will be able to create innovations in the defense industry and effectively implement them on the battlefield.
Starting from the new year, the Ukrainian defense industry and the defense forces of Ukraine will receive Ukrainian ballistic missiles with a target range of about 800 kilometers. It should also be noted that the manufacturing company has announced the development of 2 such missiles. Ballistic missiles with a strike range of up to 200 and accordingly up to 800 kilometers.
All of this means that Ukrainian developers have demonstrated the ability to create high-precision weapons that destroy important enemy military targets at great depth.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Russia is in turmoil. A wave of new terrorist attacks is sweeping the country. Bashkiria is making headlines. A powerful explosion has the whole region on its feet. Security forces are scrambling and Moscow is on high alert. Rumor has it that documents have landed on the FSB chief's desk that are forcing the authorities in the capital to make decisions on the fly. Is the country facing another Crocus or something even more frightening? Watch this.
These are the images now being widely broadcast on Russian television. They show FSB officers detaining a cell of international terrorists in Bashkiria. They were spreading the idea of creating a world caliphate. 8 detainees were preaching among Muslims. They promoted the ideology of a terrorist organization banned in Russia and during underground meetings recruited others into their ranks. But lately such reports have been appearing more and more frequently on Russian TV. And the key points in them are as follows. The FSB has reported an increased threat of terrorist attacks within the country.
From time to time, Russia creates a target for public anger. Most of the time, this is always some external force. But from time to time, there arises a need to start stirring up the situation.
Russian security services are reporting a rise in Islamic terrorism in Russia. According to media reports, such a report was received by FSB chief Alexander Bortnikov, but it has not yet been passed on to the Russian dictator Putin. However, according to other sources, the document may in fact have ended up on Putin's desk after all. And interestingly, among the key threats is also the increased activity of certain sabotage groups within the country that is far from the so-called Special Military Operations Zone, including in the capital itself, Moscow. And another important point concerns the threat of destabilizing the situation in the Caucasus.
Actions that demonstrated the strength of the state, that there are enemies and they will deal with them. This is the strong Putin, and yet more enemies who want to attack the besieged fortress.
And here we return to the previously mentioned information about the arrests in Bashkiria, where, according to the FSB, they managed to catch 8 members of a terrorist organization. At that time, it was also reported that the group was preparing active operations on Russian territory. The sources that provided this information to the media agree that in 2026, the situation could get worse if the FSB and other agencies do not make this area a priority. But here, it's important to remember that such messages are not just shared in Russia for no reason. These are well-planned provocations. Such terrorist attacks could indeed be organized by Russian special services, since this serves both internal and external audiences. For Russians themselves, it's just a banal case of destabilizing the situation.
These statements will definitely be followed by terrorist attacks. Well, or more accurately, most likely there will be suspects who are either detained or killed, and who will have certain documents or affiliations with one terrorist organization or another, or some kind of national background. This will be sold to the domestic audience. This is how Russians have always been frightened.
We all remember this very well. The terrorist attack at Crocus, which Putin used to accuse the so-called neo-Nazi Kiev regime.
On the coordinator's orders, after committing the crime, the terrorists drove toward the Russian-Ukrainian border in a car, intending to reach Kiev to receive the reward they had been promised.
It's a rather complicated narrative. As far as I understand, there were initial reports from the FSB that FSB-affiliated Telegram channels claimed that there was some kind of cache where weapons were stored, supposedly prepared for these 4 people so they could take the weapons, at least that's the idea as I understand it, and then break through toward Ukraine with them. No evidence whatsoever. So far, we haven't seen any proof that this cache exists.
In the end, this tragedy became a tool for mobilizing society and a push for a new wave of signing volunteer contracts with the Russian Ministry of Death. But for the external audience, creating a fake is not so easy. First and foremost, because it would have to be linked to Ukraine again. And that's exactly what's critically important for the Kremlin right now.
If this is used in the Ukraine case, meaning if they once again find, say, Budanov's business card, then it won't be sold domestically. It will be sold most likely outside the United States. Look, they're playing by the rules of war.
Other experts are saying the same thing.
A whole series of activities from the FSB. This is preparation for terrorist attacks both in Russia and in Ukraine. In Ukraine, the goal is to demoralize society against the backdrop of scandals, power outages, and the situation at the front. In Russia, it's to stir up the population in order to justify a new wave of mobilization.
Simply put, the Russian ruling regime is quite capable of staging a series of terrorist attacks inside the country itself, then blaming everything on Ukraine and trying to use that as leverage in negotiations. Or to completely intimidate the Russian people and drive them into total mobilization.
Moscow is on the brink of an energy catastrophe. Russia might ring in the new year in complete darkness. The Ukrainian armed forces are striking at Russia's energy system, and the risk of large-scale blackouts is growing every day. The lights in Russian homes could go out at any moment. All the sensational details right now.
The Ukrainian armed forces are significantly increasing both the number and effectiveness of strikes on Russian heating and power generation facilities. The actions of Ukraine's defense forces are a response to the ongoing attacks on Ukraine's civilian and critical infrastructure.
In order to somehow bring this war to a stalemate, to shift it, we need to learn not only to repel enemy attacks on the front line, but also to suppress their logistics and their aviation. That's why it became necessary. And I'm not even mentioning the need to strike at enterprises of the military-industrial complex and Russia's energy system.
By trying to leave Ukrainians without power, the Russian dictator is condemning millions of Russians to a dark and cold winter.
If, for example, a blackout is threatened in the capital of Ukraine, the Kremlin must realize that a blackout will also come to the Russian capital.
This is Belgorod. Basically, there's no electricity anywhere in Belgorod at all.
Since the beginning of November, Ukraine has carried out dozens of strikes on Russian electrical substations. Long-range drones are cutting off power in occupied Donetsk and Crimea.
Basically, charge your phones. Looks like they decided to cut off our electricity everywhere. I stopped counting after more than 30.
Why? Kaluzhskaya 32, darkness, and then it goes on, darkness, darkness, darkness.
And cruise missiles and jet drones are introducing millions of residents in the European part of Russia, including Moscow and the Moscow region, to the delights of blackouts. In addition to Ukrainian weapons, we must not forget about the supply of Western arms, which Ukraine has also recently begun using to strike Russian territory.
The corresponding approval has been obtained. Therefore, we can say that the territories of the Rostov, Kursk, Belgorod, and Bryansk regions are within the strike zone. I want to emphasize once again, both from Western strike systems, attacks with Scalp, Storm Shadow. Only, accordingly, the modernized version of the S-200 surface-to-air missile system.
Before the onset of winter, Ukraine possesses a wide range of powerful long-range weaponry. Bark, Pekla, Polyanitsia, and FP-1 jet drones, as well as Flamingo and Long Neptune cruise missiles, can reach the largest Russian cities, including heating and power supply facilities in Moscow and St. Petersburg. With
Consideration for the climatic features of the Russian Federation and taking into account the tactical and technical characteristics of the Ukrainian strike systems, the Russian Federation is facing a harsh winter, both literally and figuratively. First and foremost, this concerns thermal power plants and other industrial facilities that sustain the life of major Russian cities.
Shock! London is entering the game at full power. Britain has issued an ultimatum that will make your blood run cold. The new weapon is capable of breaking through the front in a matter of weeks. Putin is cornered. Moscow is frantically searching for a way out. And this is just the warm-up. What will be the fatal turning point? Watch.
Due to its weak position at the front, Russia is attacking critically important targets in Ukraine. Civilian targets, destruction and casualties among the population. Over the past day, Russian forces have attacked energy facilities in several regions of Ukraine. Restoration work continues at the sites of impact. A very important aspect in this matter is the energy assistance from the United Kingdom. The country, understanding the situation, has allocated more than 14 million euros.
Putin is trying to plunge Ukraine into darkness and cold as winter approaches. These treacherous strikes are not only an attack on Ukraine's security, but also a threat to the economic stability and growth of the United Kingdom.
London has announced the allocation of additional funds for carrying out vital repair work in Ukraine's energy sector to help Ukrainians this winter.
Russia has made Ukraine's civilian energy infrastructure a target in this war. Now, as we enter the cold winter, they are intensifying their brutal attacks on energy and heating networks, while Putin tries to intimidate the Ukrainian people. However, Ukraine continues to demonstrate exceptional resilience despite all the hardships.
Funding for restoration will ensure uninterrupted lighting and heating in the homes of Ukrainians, as well as in hospitals and schools.
We are grateful to the United Kingdom and Prime Minister Keir Starmer for extending humanitarian and energy support to Ukraine and for the announced energy assistance package. At a time when Russia is increasing the number of attacks on civilians and critical infrastructure, such solidarity is extremely important.
London continues to put pressure on Russia through sanctions as well. It has announced new restrictions for the Kremlin, which will be gradually implemented throughout 2026. This is a continuation of sanctions against the oil giants of Putin's associates Rosneft and Lukoil. These strikes pose a threat not only to Ukraine's security, but also to the economic stability of the United Kingdom itself. Ukraine's security is our security. We stand together with our G7 partners. We stand side by side, supporting Ukraine and overcoming all challenges. From the very first days of the full-scale war, the United Kingdom became one of Ukraine's key strategic partners, not only providing weapons but also creating effective financial and institutional support mechanisms. The United Kingdom. And going forward, we will continue to decisively enforce our financial sanctions as part of our broader response to Russia's barbaric invasion of Ukraine. The United Kingdom has established an important system of military assistance to Ukraine. Financing, innovative funds, international partnerships, credit mechanisms, and support for the Ukrainian defense industrial complex. It is Russia, not Ukraine, that should pay for Putin's illegal war. Using Russian assets to strengthen Ukraine's air defense, our right to Ukraine's security is critically important to us. The UK Ministry of Defence has signed contracts with companies for the maintenance of armoured vehicles, the production of artillery shells, and the repair of transferred weapons. These contracts provide for the deployment of repair facilities on Ukrainian territory. It was the United Kingdom that became one of the first countries to supply Ukraine with high-precision missile weaponry. A real breakthrough was the decision to provide long-range Storm Shadow missiles. In 2023, the British government announced the transfer of cruise missiles capable of striking targets at distances of more than 250 kilometers. Storm Shadow became the first long-range missiles received by Ukraine, and they were immediately used to strike strategic targets in the occupied territories. This month, the armed forces of Ukraine received a new batch of Storm Shadow missiles. The United Kingdom provided the Ukrainian armed forces with protective gear, vehicles, communications equipment, demining support, as well as assistance with equipment maintenance and digital transformation. Britain became the first country to announce plans to supply Ukraine with main battle tanks. In
comparison to the T-80, the stabilization and optics here are much better. Aiming is done using buttons on a panel similar to a joystick. The turret rotates 360 degrees in 9 seconds. The Challenger 2 maneuvers, making it difficult for enemy anti-tank guided missiles to aim. At the same time, the tank itself is very accurate. In
addition to the Challenger 2 tanks, shells for them were also delivered as part of the supply. The British tanks were supplemented with specialized repair and recovery vehicles, which made it possible to ensure their technical autonomy and use. In 2025, an agreement on a century-long partnership was signed between Ukraine and Britain. This comprehensive document establishes long-term cooperation between the two countries in the fields of defense, economy, energy, justice, science, culture, education, healthcare, and social policy. Britain's assistance is long-term, so we can always count on the support of a reliable partner.
The Czech Republic has unveiled a deadly mega missile that is already making the Kremlin nervous. This is a new wonder weapon. The armed forces of Ukraine are preparing to strike at the most vulnerable heart of Russia. The range is shocking, the accuracy is flawless, and the power destroys everything in its path. Allies are launching a new phase of assistance to Ukraine. All the explosive details. Coming up next. The Czech company LPP has developed a new cruise missile called Narwhal. As early as January to February 2026, the Narwhal will be tested in combat conditions in Ukraine. And mass production is scheduled to begin in the Czech Republic as early as March.
What else can be said about this missile? If we have a combination of cruise missiles like Flamingo, Narwhal, and others, I think things won't go very well for the Russians starting from the new year.
According to Defense Express analysts, the Narwhal is capable of striking targets at a range of up to 680 kilometers. This is more than enough to hit Moscow and the Russian strategic bomber base at Engels. So,
what is known at this point? Currently, it is known that this missile will have a range of 650 to 700 kilometers. It is known that it is about 4 meters long and that its warhead is quite substantial. 4 meters in length, it has good aerodynamics, but its total weight is around 260 kilograms. That means the warhead will be about the same as the Shahed's, 40 to 50 kilograms, no more. It is capable of flying, as I said, for 680 to 700 kilometers. And it has its own navigation system, which is not significantly affected by electronic warfare.
Rodim Petrash, co-owner of LPP, explains that ideally, the Narwhal should be part of a large ecosystem.
We want to come up with something that will work in a disrupted environment. We will send 10 or 20 of our basic 40-kilogram drones, which will suppress the enemy's air defense. At that very moment, 2 Narwhals will quickly fly over them, and above them there will be another pair of invisible ones.
Therefore, considering that the Narwhal is part of the system, it can be assumed that along with it, the Ukrainian armed forces may also receive the stealth drone, Night Ride Stealth, and the MTS drone.
I'm not surprised that such missiles are appearing. I'm not surprised that they're appearing in the Czech Republic. I'm absolutely not surprised that the private sector is significantly more effective than state enterprises. And I hope that this missile will be able to cause a lot of trouble for the Russians. All the more so since the Czech Republic claims that this is a specific ecosystem, meaning there will not only be a cruise missile but also drones. And
while the Czech Republic is preparing to test its missile in Ukraine, Norway is planning to purchase a ground-launched missile with a range of 500 kilometers.
The EU says, we're going to build a drone wall, and Norway says, I'll do my own thing over here, don't worry about it, they'll handle their own. Because it's a very wealthy country, they have a lot of money, and now they've announced this program that they will either develop, purchase, or perhaps jointly produce medium-range missiles. The idea is to have the capability to reach Murmansk and maybe even Moscow.
Meanwhile, in the EU, a so-called parade of national projects for the production of long-range weapons has begun.
The Netherlands is urging its own developers to provide an alternative to the Tomahawk within 3 months. Requirements for range and warhead weight have been announced. Sweden wants to acquire long-range missiles with a 2,000-kilometer range against Russia by 2030 because there is an emergency situation. Will it reach Moscow? France wants to create a ballistic missile with a range of 1,000 kilometers.
At the moment, only 3 European countries actually have the means to strike at distances greater than 1,000 kilometers. These are the United Kingdom, which is armed with American Tomahawks and American Trident ballistic missiles for submarines. Then there is France with its own MDSN cruise missiles and M51 ballistic missiles. And Ukraine with its already operational and domestically developed advanced Long Neptune and formidable Flamingo missile systems. Furthermore, among these 3 specific nations, uniquely, only Ukraine possesses significant and proven real combat experience, effectively employing its long-range precision strike weapons in direct engagement specifically targeting Russian military assets.